Hello ghouls and gals, a bit of a different one today. Rather than look at any one character, we're journeying back to the end times, unfortunately, to ask one supposedly simple question. Could it have been fixed? It's long past time to fix the end times now, and YouTubers better than me have put together how the plot could have been reworked, but I'm asking something a little bit different here today. I'm asking if, on that fateful day in 2015, when Games Workshop decided that Warhammer Fantasy would be coming to a close, whether it could have actually worked out. As a business decision, there was the case for it, as fantasy models just weren't selling, nor were they getting updated. But as a lore channel, we don't really care about that. And instead, I'd like to go over whether this could have been fixed from a lore perspective. Your initial knee-jerk reaction is probably going to be either to turn this video off, or believe there's no way the end times could have worked, and tell me to, go jump off a bridge as usual. After all, blowing up a world does seem to be quite the stupid idea, and the way it was executed is even stupider, and is burned well enough into every Warhammer fan's mind, to the point that even now, bringing up the topic is going to give a lot of people flashbacks to lazy writing, horrible character choices, and bad guy plot armor that's worse than anime fanfiction. But what if the end times doesn't have any of that? What if the people wanting to end Warhammer Fantasy didn't do so because the Chaos God of Business had decided it would happen, but because it seemed a valid way to bring the stories of the setting to a close and move on to our next chapter in Age of Sigmar? There's already some mental gymnastics needed here, but stick with me, as I do have a pretty wild idea on why I think not only the end times could have worked in Warhammer Fantasy, but that Games Workshop has already achieved the end times before with another setting. Before we get into what a better version of the end times looks like, though, it's important to remember why we hated the event in the first place. The end times is essentially the story of Archaon finally getting his big win. Chaos finally trumps over order and does so in one final flash in the destruction of the world. Despite humanity, elvenkind, dwarves, lizardmen, and even orcs coming together to fight Chaos, for some reason Archaon's horde is just too strong this time, and so they win. Simple as. As we said in my last video covering the end times, two main things come out of this event that had people incandescent with rage. The first was lazy, rushed writing, and the second was poor decision making. There's a lot of crossover between both of these, so to save time I'll just tackle all the stupidity in one point. Essentially, you have perhaps the biggest thing Games Workshop has ever done in the lore, and certainly the biggest event in Warhammer Fantasy, and you give it under 12 months to be fully wrapped up. That is baffling, and so what you end up with is a lot of cutting corners. Skarsnik, for example, is the protagonist of an end times book, but is forgotten by the final battle. Even the bigger plot points are jumped to, not because they're earned or that they make sense, but it just feels like there was a list of things that have to happen, and so the plot does whatever acrobatics it needs to get there. I mean, even to just have Chaos come down from the north and decide to win this time feels lazy. There's no nuance to the story, no reason why Order failed this time when it had succeeded against greater forces. It doesn't even make much sense as to why suddenly the harsh, bitter winter landscape of the Chaos Waste can produce enough warriors to vastly outnumber the armies of Kislev, the Empire, Bretonnia and Ulthuan. This is why it's incredibly hard to imagine a good end times, because the one we've got is so lackluster and poor, it makes even the idea of it leave a bad taste in your mouth. Although, even with all that, I think Games Workshop could have made this a tough but ultimately understandable pill to swallow for Warhammer Fantasy fans, but this can't be changed through the intricacies of the plot. As I've said, people have already done that better than I ever could, and so what we're looking at instead is the event itself and how we must shift the nature of it. Here's where things get controversial, because I believe that Games Workshop has already pulled off the end times before, or a end times before, just with Warhammer 40,000. I believe that the Horus Heresy was indeed the end times for that setting. Of course, there are major differences, don't shoot me yet. The Heresy was created alongside 40k, it's not the ending of the setting in the lore, and the story goes on after the Heresy, yada yada yada, the end times doesn't end the galaxy, blah. However, when we think about the Horus Heresy, and what it meant for the grimdark far future, it's hard to see it not as at least an end times level event. Horus, alongside the Chaos Gods, rips apart the Imperium, tearing down the advancement of humanity and mortally wounding the Emperor to the point where he can only sit as a corpse on a big chair. This might not be the instant radical explosion that means the end of Warhammer Fantasy, but considering for 10,000 years all humanity has done in 40k is stagnate and regress to a religious authoritarian rule, perhaps Horus, even if he didn't win, still inflicted a slow death upon the humans of Warhammer 40,000. There is a belief that the end times are coming in Warhammer 40k, but I don't think a big threat will ever need to rear its head again. Instead, the Imperium will be slowly chipped away at, like wolves nipping at the heel of a great stag. Its enemies will bring it down bit by bit. If we are to take the Horus Heresy as our example then, I think it would keep a lot of fans happy if instead of aiming to just have a Chaos Wins lol ending, we go for something a little deeper, something that may have us feeling a little sadder, but much less angry. To make the end times feel earned, we have to make it encompass the key themes of Warhammer, the things that we see in almost every story Games Workshop puts out. The bad guys can't just win, they have to earn it, and they can't do that by just suddenly having overwhelming numbers and powers. Instead, to see Order truly fail, that has to happen from the inside. Not in the sense that Manfred can just show up to screw things over when it seems like there's a glimmer of hope, but through the incompetence of our heroes. They should bring down the world around them. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here on plot ideas, as once more other people just do it way better than I ever could. But what if the end times began at an entirely different point, one of arrogance from the forces of order? Perhaps we start following a great chaos defeat, even the end of Archaon himself, and have Karl Franz, Tyrion, Thorgrim and Luwin all sit back and ready themselves for an era of peace. In truth, the Chaos Gods are working in the background, readying another greater army. Only Lord Croak, the oldest defender of the world, sees this and attempts to reach the High Elves, or any force of order. They refuse to listen, preferring to see what tangible proof they have before them. In the meantime, Manfred seeks to awaken the Gash after the forces of order are weakened by chaos. This is pretty normal in terms of how the End Times does it anyway. When the Gash returns, so do the ruinous powers, catching our heroes on the back foot with purpose, rather than just deciding to stroll down through Kislev with a big army because, again, the Chaos God of business is at full power. Now attacked by death and chaos at once, the Empire is caught in the middle and requests aid, and from there, the End Times begins. Of course, we can still have the Bretonnian and Elven civil wars, as these help sow the idea of discord among the forces of order when they are needed most, but we also need that to come into the Empire. And I believe that to really show off how disorganised order is, we need a great conflict to shred the Empire, one that is started by Voltan. I've always sort of hated Voltan, as he's just introduced to us with no purpose and believed to be Sigmar's chosen, but honestly doesn't get to do much besides slay some Chaos champions. He's not an interesting character, nor does he have much that really makes him shine, and to me, this is a massive waste of what could have been the central conflict in the End Times. Chaos is at its best, not when it's commanding hordes of warriors, nor summoning demons, but when it is corrupting the purity of other powers in the world. Who is a better candidate for corruption? Who would break the spirits of the Empire more than the chosen of Sigmar? I've gone about this in a long-winded way, but yes, I'm basically pitching for the End Times to be Horus Heresy 2.0, but with Voltan playing our role of Horus. It might sound lazy, but we can't get lazier than what the End Times already is. Think about it, I mean there's a lot to play with here. Voltan has a claim to a big seat of Imperial power if he pushes hard enough, and we already knew that Karl Franz was sort of afraid of him taking the Imperial throne when it was believed that he was Sigmar's chosen. If Voltan were to see Karl Franz as being incapable of leadership, just having the seeds of betrayal planted by some incompetence, then when Nagash and Chaos are rumbling again, Voltan could get desperate and cause a conflict that rips the Empire apart. Only when all of the forces of order are weakened does then Chaos fully step in, bringing in an apocalyptic level of demons. This is where the Lizardmen would try and fail to save the world again, sending what survivors they have into space, where we can either see the utter destruction of order, or, in my preferred case, such a Pyrrhic victory that Warhammer Fantasy will never recover. Kill off Franz at the hands of Voltan, then bring Sigmar back to face down Chaos in one final battle if you wish. Kill off as many of our favourites as you like, but even have Order still win at the end. But by that point, the citizens of the Empire will have been set back to the Bronze Age, and the land of Ulthuan will be left at the bottom of the sea. There is nothing that we recognise of the world that we knew. And that is how you would end it. At the end of it all, as whoever's left wonders how the broken pieces can be picked up, those underneath, those that have waited patiently, ending their infighting and readying to take the surface once and for all, are ready to strike. That's right, Skaven victory. Yes to the yes. Of course, other factions will be able to survive, such as the Orcs, because they're just going to always be there, but in my opinion, putting a hard reset for Warhammer Fantasy rather than having the world explode is the better option. It gives it much more of a post-apocalyptic vibe for the few humans and elves left, if Games Workshop were to explore that setting in the future, without changing much from the actual original End Times plot, just ensuring that the death of the Empire comes from within, rather than without. With some great writing and the time given to this sort of shifted perspective of the end times, we could really see a tragic end to Sigmar's realm as people pick sides, fighting in a war that had been created by powers far beyond them. You see, Chaos doesn't need Archaon to win. It never did. It just needed to spend more than a fraction of its power looking at the world. But it wouldn't want to destroy everything, as that would be counterproductive. How are you going to feast on souls if there are none around, you know? Instead, Chaos can win by destroying all that makes the forces of order civilized and safe, giving them no barrier to the souls they want, whether that's for corruption or just a late night snack. And so, with all that rambling out the way, what have we learned, kids? Well, the end times, in my opinion, could have been fixed. There were some ideas there that, if executed correctly and with good timing, could have worked out. But to make the end times feel earned and an event worthy of its name, it cannot just be simplified to bad guys win, world blows up, lol. The team at GW should have given this the time and the care that they did for the Horus Heresy, and maybe not 50 books worth of stuff, but enough for us to really grow attached to our key players and then see them fall in the cruelest manner. Then you have an ending that feels bitter, not because they screwed you, but because the writers reeled you in hook, line and sinker. Big betrayals do appear from within the end times, but they're not executed well. We're all about execution here. As done in the right way, any idea can come across well. Even if you can't find value in the plot points I've made, I'm hoping that you can find some value in the argument that Games Workshop should have spent a similar amount of time and put a similar amount of care and attention in the end times that they have in the Horus Heresy. As with that amount of effort put into the end times, I believe it could have been something that really could have worked, or at least been less hated. But yeah, what do you think of my slapdash fixes to the end times? This was an incredibly silly and rambly video, and to be honest, I'm not sure any of the arguments made sense, but if you do want me to go deeper into this topic or even flesh it out further, let me know. Remember to sub and like, as I'm trying to hit 1k before the end of the year, and that would be really, really nice. If you can, that'd be great. But yeah, otherwise, guys, thanks for getting this far, thanks for letting me fill the air with just noise, and I'll see you soon.